Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Marie Vigourou.
And I'm Drew Schulman. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 17, Goodbye Stranger. Let's get this show on the road. There was a lot in this episode.
This is an important one this season.
It's like every scene is like revelation.
This was also the first episode that was part of like the Pride Month live watches with our patrons and supporters.
It was super fun.
It was awesome, frankly.
This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, speaking about the pizza man, what is your go-to pizza order? On the supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed. You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and claim your perks.
Do you have anything to say about the episode before we jump into the recap?
Genuinely, I really like this one. It was a really fun episode, especially to watch live with everybody. And again, continuing the trend of episodes that break my heart a little bit or a lot, I'm happy I watched it with people.
All right. Are you ready?
Count me down.
3, 2, 1, unicorn.
We have an amazing opening scene where Cass has killed a billion Deans. I know I said amazing opening scene. I meant like amazing, like emotionally traumatic scene, not like fun or good. And reinstilling how much we hate Naomi and how much she's controlling Cass. We then cut to the brothers after the cold open, where they are dealing with demons digging up holes and being weird and things don't really seem right. And demons are being killed for them in a very weird way, which clearly was angelic, but they didn't put two and two together for some reason. Turns out it's Cass, because he's going after a tablet, angel tablet, and Naomi's keeping secrets, and they find out the reason they were digging for weird things is because of Lucifer's crypt, or one of them, and Meg is the informant, and she's been lying, and now she's back on their side. And then we have some really adorable moments of Sam and Meg bonding, some really kinky moments of Cass and Meg bonding, and then some very traumatic moments of Dean and Cass situation shipping, as I'm going to put it. But they find the tablet. Cass is free from Naomi's control. He flees with it because he has to keep it safe from everybody, including Dean. Meg, unfortunately, is killed by Crowley. And they're back on the road with not much to know for except they lost Meg. Cass is free and lost. They know a little bit. Time.
So this episode was written by Robbie Thompson, directed by Thomas J. Wright, and it originally aired on March 20th, 2013.
They put together a great episode. I mean, losing Meg hurts. I know Demon, there's always a chance. It was an angel blade, so probably not. I think I've said it so many times of like, I guess this is the actual end of the character, and I've been wrong, so who knows? But if this is the end of Meg, I'm saddened about it. If we get Meg back later, it'll be a lovely surprise. Because I've grown to love her over the last few seasons. Like, each time she showed up, I loved her more. And this was the one that really solidified how much I enjoyed her, and I was super sad to lose her.
Yeah, I know. The show has a tendency of doing that, right? Of like showing you what you love most about a character right before they take it away from you, right? I think I just want to highlight that this is a Robbie Thompson episode, and what I'm realizing with this rewatch is how much I enjoy his episodes. So I'm going to put that up there before we start. So when I was taking notes about this episode, actually, I realized that so much of the long game is me going, we find out that, or it turns out that, like I'm always saying that. That's very, very on theme for this week. So much of what is actually mentioned here, we're going to be talking about in story time. We find out that Naomi has been training Cass to kill Dean, making him kill 1,000 different versions of him.
What an establishing cold open. Like, I feel like so often the cold open is like, ooh, that's our monster of the week, surprise. And then to kind of frame Cass in that light for an episode in a way that is actually, like, terrifying. Oh, brutal.
Last episode, we found out that Sam is really, really unwell from the trials. He was spitting up blood, and that's definitely something that continues in this episode.
I'm, like, really worried as, like, more trials come up. What else will happen? Like, how far does this go? And then how does it end? Like, I know that's what they want me to worry about, but they're doing a good job.
We get a call back to Dean praying to Cass in the last episode as well.
Yeah, we discussed that one quite a bit and how heavy that was, that just the unanswered prayer. So again, we'll talk about it, but I'm glad it's at least it tangibly reconnected to here.
We get a very iconic Cass line. I am a celestial being.
Not wrong.
We get Meg back briefly for this episode for a final time, I guess. We find out that there's an angel tablet, and the question, what can the angel tablet do, becomes quite the important one.
I predicted before this that the demon tablet would close both the gates of heaven and hell. But if there's a demon tablet for closing hell, then I would assume the angel tablet closes heaven? But that seems like a weird... I don't know, it seems weird. And then, given what we learn later about Naomi and Crowley, I'm up in the air on this one. I haven't really pinned down what I think yet.
Like you hinted at earlier in this episode, we get a call back to the Pizza Man, which is the time that Cass passionately kissed Meg in 610 Caged Heat.
As much as I have a weird vibe from Cass in this episode, very soulless Sam vibe of he's not being himself, the flirting with Meg and that whole thing was still very, very I love it.
Oh, we'll talk about it. Crowley is also in this episode.
Very brief time on camera, but he makes it count, unfortunately.
It turns out that Sam is, and I quote, damaged in ways that even Castiel can't heal.
It feels like we need to say this sometimes because I feel like so often we've seen terrible things happen and just boom, angel magic, you're all better. We see it in this episode, literally. So just to drive the point home that what Sam is doing to himself via these trials is a step above what an angel can deal with, really drives home the point of oh, this isn't just it's giving you a bad lung. It's oh no, you were cosmically cursed.
I think Cass says something about something at a subatomic level, right? His magnetic field, his electromagnetic field, and then Dean calls him Bill Nye. But yeah, that's what happens.
That had very midichlorian vibes to it of you didn't have to go that niche. You could just say ooh, magic. You didn't have to go subatomic.
That's Cass for you, I suppose. The undiagnosed autism of it all. We get what is now known in the fandom as the crypt scene, which we'll be talking about in Storytime for sure, where Dean finds out that Naomi has been controlling Cass since he got out of purgatory, and he asks the very controversial question, what broke the connection?
Gee, I wonder what it could be. I have no idea. Anyways, moving on.
Right. We also find out that despite saying that working with demons is unclean, Naomi not only works with Crowley, but may also have had a fling with him.
There's their own Pizza Man story there we're not hearing.
Well, there you go. And I do want to mention that here because that shows, again, that angels do have, or in general, not saying that every one of them does, but angels can feel sexual attraction. This week, our theme is coming out. And obviously, this phrase has a very, very important place in the queer community, right? The full phrase being coming out of the closet. And it refers to the self-disclosure of a queer identity. Nothing like that really happens in this episode, or not in words, so to speak. But given how much of the narrative invests in the destiel of it all, it just felt right to us to use this phrase for a theme. Now, because there's no, and again, I use textual very pointedly here because, again, if we're looking at flagging and all of that stuff, I think that there is definitely some disclosure, but seeing as there's no textual or verbal self-disclosure of queer identity in this episode, we're using the phrase more as the more general idea of something coming to light or appearing out of darkness. And there's definitely a lot of that going on.
I remember when we got to this theme and I was ooh, that seems like a bit of a very specific choice of terms. But then talking about the crypt scene, it makes even more sense. So if I can start with Sam, he's been doing his best to cover up his condition, I guess we'll call it, from Dean. And we get to see how Sam handles it as we, the audience, see Dean discover it early on in the episode. And I feel like we've seen this trope on the show so many times of like one brother hiding something while the other already knows or has an idea about it and sort of like doesn't say anything, hoping that either they'll come clean or ultimately having to call them out and be upset about it. However, while the initial reveal of Dean's knowledge puts Sam in like a hard spot and feels like the same old argument, it's like their final discussion back in the Impala that solidifies some growth. Like Sam admits what he's hidden and how it's affecting him, and Dean accepts it and offers whatever help he can offer. The truth was brought up and came out, and the result was a good one for once.
I was actually really, really happy about this because they're both going through some really, really triggering stuff, or like stuff that's triggering to them individually and pretty specifically, right? Like Sam is going through the trials where he feels the need to like prove himself, especially because he feels like no one believes in him, right? Which is why he ends up hiding all of this from Dean. And then Dean on his end is being lied to by Cass and Sam, which is obviously bringing back some pretty bad memories of being betrayed by both Cass in season 6 and by Sam in season 4. But despite all of that, they both manage to deal with the truth that comes out here, right? Like both in the fact that like Sam is damaged and in the fact that like he lied about it, but also in the fact that like Dean has known about it. And I really love that because like this is really how I love the brothers. Like this is the kind of relationship that I want them to have all the time.
They draw on so many inspirational moments of like things we've seen in the past, but we now see them dealing with it in a more grown up and like mature way than we haven't seen in the past, which is wonderful.
I do have to say that I love that no matter how angry they are at each other, they will always get together to tell Meg to shut up, which is just peak sibling relationship to me.
Well, we said the same thing about the way they make fun of Garth. Like, no matter how much they can be like butting heads, they can always make fun of Garth together.
It just makes me think of like my sister and I. Like, no matter how angry we are with each other, we will always pick on our brothers. You know, like that's just how it is.
Oh, sibling energy. So I pointed out this kind of like keeping a secret situation is not, wholly uncommon for Sam and Dean. But I think Sam having the reassurance and support this time around when they do finally discuss it properly and not, while in the middle of a crazy demony adventure, it's the turning point in their relationship as a new layer of trust and understanding can begin. Like it really is just it makes me so happy.
I also think that like now, compared to season 4, they each have experienced loving relationships independently, right? And I do think that makes a difference. Because I've talked before about how I think that like Sam and Dean grow the most when they're apart. And I think that that's also what's coming out here, right? Like what's being brought to light. It's that Dean has learned from his relationship with Benny and Sam has learned from his relationship with Amelia. And like we're reaping, they're reaping the benefits of that in the form of, being able to talk through what would have been basically like a season-long arc in the early seasons. And now it's like, it's a nothing burger.
Yeah, those relationships really like had a positive impact on them. And I'm going to go back and say, yeah, we're also reaping the benefits because we get to see them grow. And it also means we're not stuck, doing the 7 episodes of like, oh my God, just one of you tell the other one you know the secret. I do want to jump over a little bit to Sam's little chat with Meg and him like coming out with his telling her of his time with Amelia. And I think Sam just needs someone to talk to. And for so long, Dean like wouldn't hear it, given, how he felt abandoned and had to go through so much. And like, I get it. Not to say Meg has had like a wonderful year herself, kind of dealing with her own shitty stuff. Like, but she was able to listen and let Sam talk through how he felt and express himself, something that he desperately needed.
I'm actually really glad that you're bringing this up because like, something else came out of this for me in this conversation, and it's Meg's like unicorn comment. Because we see Sam and Meg talking about what Sam did during his like year off, quote unquote. And he talks about like hitting the dog and he talks about Amelia. And you can tell that Meg understands that he really, really loved her and probably still loves her, right? Like she calls her the unicorn. The idea here being that like Amelia was like the mystical creature, like the one that could make Sam quit hunting. And now if you flash forward to the end of the episode where Meg tells Sam to like go ahead and she's going to stay behind and fight Crowley, she says, go save your brother. and my unicorn. So she's directly comparing her feelings for Cass to Sam's feelings for Amelia. Like, Cass is the mystical creature for her. Like, he is the one who could make her quit demoning, maybe? And here's what I think comes to light here. Sam left his unicorn, whereas Meg died for hers. And so, like, our entire conversation from the episode where Sam doesn't go to meet Amelia is basically relived in this moment. I think that Amelia loved Sam a lot more than Sam loved Amelia.
I did not think that's where you were going to go at the end of that sentence. I thought we were going to compare the fact that Meg dying for her unicorn was part of what was driving Sam to do these trials and risk his life to save humanity, knowing full well that the people he loves, and I know we can go on like just his general love for humanity and saving the world, but like to know there's like one special person in his life that like he can't be with, but he wants her to be safe.
Honestly, that's originally where I was going, but then I remembered the fact that, like, before the trials, he didn't show up to meet her. And that's why I kind of changed my direction near the end here. But I agree. I think it's a valid reading. I don't think it's mine.
These are both perfectly valid readings, and I think it just shows that sometimes Sam can be more complex, and I love that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sam is a very complex character. The issue is that it's often left so much is left unsaid when it comes to Sam because Dean exteriorizes a lot of his emotions whereas Sam internalizes them, right? We've had these discussions before. This is a perfect example where I sort of wish that we had Sam externalizing a bit more.
I mean, that would be great if he had someone he can keep talking to, like Meg, but unfortunately, that's off the table.
She gone.
She gone. Dean this week takes like a much more passive role in regards to our theme. Like he's involved in everyone's secrets coming to light. Like he himself doesn't really have any. He's been very open with his feelings and speaking his mind recently.
So there are a lot of of things that are like coming to light for him, but there are some that are coming to light about him though.
I must point out the one thing that does come to light regarding Dean was his praying to Cass the previous week, which of course was news to Sam. Obviously, Cass heard him and he admits as much, but the lack of response in the moment and now knowing it was actively ignored is super hurtful. You know, like I would love a reflection from Dean post episode, knowing what he knows now regarding Cass's situation and what had come to light this week, if he'd have understood or felt differently. Though I suspect it would not change too much because even after Dean learns of Naomi and Cass's lack of control, he's still left like really hurt by what happened and losing Cass all over again.
I think it would have been really nice to hear Dean put this into words. But we do get quite a few moments in this episode where I think we can put together what he's thinking. If I may, enter into evidence what he says to Cass when Cass is beating him, right? He says, and these are all literally all of the lines that he says. He says, Cass, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you, but if you're in there and if you can hear me, you don't have to do this. Cass, fight this. This is not you. Fight it. Cass, this isn't you. This isn't you. Cass, I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. Cass, it's me. We're family. We need you. I need you. And honestly, this really reminds me of Swan Song when like Sam, in a moment where he's possessed by Lucifer, is just like beating Dean. And Dean is like, it's okay, Sam, I'm here. Like this has very much the same vibes, I find. And this is why I think that as much as Cass not responding to his prayers like really hurt Dean, I also think that Dean knows that Cass wasn't himself, right? Like I think he has more faith in Cass than just thinking that he's not going to answer for no reason. Like he knows there's always a reason. And it does come out later that it was Naomi who was controlling him. So Dean does get confirmation of that.
One, he doesn't fight back. I feel like if anyone else were attacking Dean, even if it was Sam or Bobby or like anyone he loved and trusted, he'd have fought back a little bit, even if it was just in self-defense. But with Cass, he just doesn't. And just knows this can't be my Cass. Something's wrong. I'm going to like just try to get through to you. And that is... Oh.
We're going to talk about that. There's more to talk about there.
Cass is just full of reveals this week. It seems that by the end, Naomi no longer has a grip on him, which is a good start. And he's now free, although something seems off. And I'm very afraid of like what that may imply. Having Naomi finally revealed to Dean, and by extension, Sam, I would assume, is like a great feeling as they can finally put some context to the weirdness of Cass since his return. And I'm excited to see if and how that is handled, as I don't like Cass being at odds with the Dean. I want this resolved. It makes me feel ick.
I don't really see them as being at odds anymore, or at least like it's not the same, right? At least that's kind of like smoothed over, that has come to light, that has come out. And now there's something else. So like Cass has the tablet, the angel tablet, and he feels like he has to protect it from heaven, but also from Dean. And we don't quite know why just yet.
They're no longer at odds. They're just out of sync. And I want that rectified, but I also want the mystery of like what's going on with Cass resolved, because that's just for me. I do want to lightly touch on there this small part of Cass that, while being basically under a form of mind control, seems to keep slipping out and letting him save Meg and then Dean. Like, I wonder how much of Cass was really running the show at times, and if our opening shot of the countless dead Deans, that he had destroyed, was not him playing along to get past all of it to gain Naomi's trust, or if Naomi really had such a grip on him. Like, I'm kind of like conspiratorially thinking there might be more to like how much Cass was in control than he was letting on.
I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment, right? But it's not really how this is understood in the fandom, or even like how the show creators and actors have talked about it before. It's for a lot of people, like especially fans, this has been compared, the whole Cass Naomi situation to conversion therapy. Because we have like the literal behavioral quote unquote therapy where Cass was forced to kill 1,000 Deans. Until it basically felt, and again, I'm using very big air quotes, natural or normal, not to have feelings for him. We also have what we can think of as like electroshock therapy, which was like the torture that we saw Cass having a trauma response to when he witnessed it inflicted on Alfie. So I think that like in an episode where we talk about coming out, we also have to mention like the very real and very strong forces that force literally people to stay in or to remain hidden. And I think it's no mistake that Naomi's office goes from like the very sterile white lighting to bi lighting the second that the conversion therapy fails, right? Because Cass is queer and no amount of therapy can change that.
That was a great moment. I just need to bring it up again because it was just such a great moment in the live watch where someone's like, oh, look at the lighting in the office. And I'm like, oh, like, is Naomi lit in a certain way where it's like something? And then we cut to the scene again and it's like, oh no, they just literally put the bi flag up in bright, shiny colors on a wall. No, there is zero subtlety here. Bravo. Speaking of zero subtlety, we also have a very cute bit of like Cass Meg flirting, calling back to, as you said, Cage Seat, season 6, episode 10, and their pizza time. And as much as I thought this was like cute, and I have accepted some multi-shipping here because Meg Steele is just too adorable and classic shipping vibes. I mean, come on, like an angel and a devil, one sarcastic, one literal. It's too cute. But I now need to throw like into the list of things. Like, again, was Cass playing along to throw up Naomi? Though, like, I do not know if Naomi would prefer Cass flirting with Dean or Meg. Although, given Naomi's secret coming to light at the very end of the episode to just, use evidence, maybe it was somehow Cass testing her and how far she'd let him go in befriending and flirting with demons. Okay, even I think that theory is a little too far-fetched.
I do think it's important to talk about the Meg Steele of it all because, like, again, in this episode, we really see, like, a tenderness between them. And some lust also between them. And I know that a lot of people understand Cass as gay, and I'm honestly one of those. So I wouldn't really want to go against that. I think it's so apparent in this episode, like it comes out that he does have feelings for Meg in this episode, no matter how we work it out into his identity. That's fine too.
I think they have a very adorable relationship, and I think he can be read in many different ways and still cast I don't think this flirtatious and like lustful moment with Meg outdoes any of the Cass is clearly gay, but like it just builds the character and the evolution of his sexuality and journey and coming out story.
Specific labels should be adopted by the person who will carry them, right? And because Cass hasn't quite labeled himself, it could be any flavor of queer, right? Like he could be any flavor of queer. And that happens too, right? Maybe he would choose a label at this particular point in time that he wouldn't choose later on or that he wouldn't have chosen before. And again, that is okay. I want to talk about the line, Cass, it's me, we're family, we need you, I need you. Because there's a lot of things that I'd like to have come to light for you here. And the first one being that was not the original line. The original line, as written by Robbie Thompson, was I love you. And it was actually Jensen Ackles who argued that Dean would never say that. And so they settled on I need you. And this might come as a surprise to many, many of you, but I personally think that that was the better choice for Dean in this moment in time. Because remember, we talked about Dean's relationship with prayer and faith and how he sees prayer as begging, like literally last episode. And what gives begging more than kneeling in front of your lover, your face bloodied by his fists, telling him that you need him? Obviously, we know that this is fiction, and we know that Cass is being controlled by a bigger force than him, right? Like, this is not an advice column. This is literary analysis for a TV show about monsters, right? In real life, I would have very different advice for you. But in this context of Cass, Dean, in the context of Supernatural, I do think that I need you was the better line than I love you. And the second thing I want to point out is that we've heard this kind of thing before, or at least like this kind of like trying to disguise one's feelings by including other people in them. And it's going to happen again. But looking back, I'm thinking of 502 Good God, Y'all, when Cass says, I'm hunted, I rebelled, I did it all of it for you, and you failed. You and your brother destroyed the world. And at the time, you and I, Drew, had talked about how it really seemed like Cass was only talking to Dean and about Dean there when he says, I did it all for you. But then he like casually drops in the like you and your brother. And so I would suggest that like you keep an ear out for those kinds of things in the future because they are going to show up more and more.
The roller coaster you just brought me on was quite impeccable. Because at first, like, what a strong line. Oh, Ackles not wanting to have the line in there. But then I think about even the way he talks about the people he loves. He never says love. He says, I need you. He needs Bobby. He needed his father. He needs Sam. So I think it's actually, you're right. It's the right choice for Dean. 100%. Because I think it means, I don't want to say more, but it means what it clearly was meant to mean.
There's a really long conversation to have about Jensen Ackles is like reactions to queer readings of Dean back then versus now. But that's not a conversation for today. So I know that this particular conversation about the I love you versus I need you is contentious because of that. But I just think that it was the right choice. This week, we have a message from Kat. Now, before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail. To respond to anything we discussed today or to ask us a question, you can use the recording app on your phone and email us the recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com.
Hello, Mary and Drew. It's Kat again. I know you're probably getting a lot of voicemails from me, but I'm binging the show, and so I'm just getting so many thoughts cooking in my head. And I'm in the sort of season 4 and 5 zone right now. And there's a lot of talk about Sam and the concept of pride and his sort of chaining on for the first few seasons, his belief in being the chosen one and all this sort of thing. And I was just listening to one of the voicemails that was talking about the fact that maybe part of this comes from his desire to be seen as valued, and to be like his freakishness to be valued. And I found it really interesting because in the episode before that, the Carrying Wayward episode before that, there was a lot of talk about the way in which John's treatment of the two boys and the differing versions of the abuse they likely faced has changed their outlook. So Dean, I think we understand, had a certain level of physical abuse, a certain level of emotional abuse leveled against him. Whereas I think in Sam, what comes across as being more prevalent is a level of total neglect and disregard. And so when we see and understand the way that Sam's childhood went, I think a lot of the times what we see is this impression of Dean being his parent that he went to for love and trust and affection. And while Dean sees himself very much in that parental role, for Sam, John is still his dad. And his dad, as far as he understood it as a child, his dad didn't care about him. His dad dumped him on his brother and left out the motel door. And, you know, you have to think that really informs the way in which a kid understands their value. And I think that when we're talking about pride, and I think it's something that, you know, this entire fandom will be able to understand what I'm talking about here in terms of the relationship between pride and queerness is often a very sticky topic because, you know, pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. It's supposed to be this horrific thing. It's what made Lucifer fall. But at the same time, as a queer person, the concept of pride to me is about being in a situation, being in a family or being in a culture or being in a society that tells you in some way that what you are is not right or damaged or wrong, which, you know, isn't true, of course, but you get inundated with that. And so pride is this defense mechanism. It's the way in which you turn around to an abusive and neglectful society and go, no, you know what, actually, I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of my ability to express love. I'm proud of my ability to be myself. I'm proud of my ability to be brave and walk out the door and love who I love and present how I present and talk the way I do, walk the way I do, dress the way I do. And I feel like in Sam, we're actually seeing, to me, the evolution of where his pride comes from is likely something that's a little bit more akin to that, because we know that him and John butted heads. They did not get on. And I have to think that at a certain point in his childhood, and we see it a little bit in flashback episodes that this comes across, at a certain point in his childhood, he kind of decides, I'm not going to win Dad's affection. I'm not going to win his attention. So I'm going to start being the best me that I can be and saying essentially a metaphorical screw you, Dad. And so I think he builds up pride as this defense mechanism over time to John ignoring him. He's saying, well, I don't need Dad's validation. I'm going to validate myself. I'm going to be proud of who I am. And then as this sort of chosen one narrative gets dripped into that, it's suddenly justifying this sense of, actually, yeah, I am really great. And Dad was afraid of all the things that I could do. He did hate this thing that was secretly making me powerful. And I mean, we see that fades out in later seasons, and I have a lot to say about Sam's social and emotional arcs in later seasons. But I would be really interested to hear what your thoughts are about that concept of Sam and pride and protection, and the way in which Sam, I think, had to psychologically protect himself in a lot of ways from the way in which John completely disregarded him. So, not to bring it to a down note, but my God, if it's not a down note, it's not a Supernatural fan podcast, is it? But yeah, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Your conversations and your insights are always so fascinating. They always kind of twist my brain around and make me explore the show from new ways. So yeah, I really want to hear what you have to say. Yeah, keep on podcasting. Carry on.
Thank you, Kat, for that message. That was what a timely message, given, I mean, we're recording this during Pride Month. I feel like it's releasing next month. Anyways, timing still feels good on my part. I, love that connection between, Pride and his chosen one complex, and you're right. I feel like looking back at, flashback episodes with little Sam in, hotel rooms, it's he's considered this, such a precious thing, that, Dean, you have to protect your brother, but he is ultimately kind of ignored by John. And I think there's also something I see it all the time in media, but it's something even I felt it's one thing to do something and have a parent be mad at you, but another one for them to just not even disappointed, but just not react to you. It's almost worse. And I really love the idea that Sam's rebellion against John and the way John made him feel was to take pride as a form of rebellion and embracing his being himself and doing things his own way and not being, what his father wanted of him, but being what he wanted of him. And it's so interesting because I feel so often our queer analogies and metaphors generally focus on Dean, but that we have this weirdly pride and queer similarities in the way Sam is choosing to rebel against John and ultimately succeed, in my opinion. It's a really fun and eye-opening look at Sam, who I often feel we don't get to see through this lens, and I really love that. Thank you,
Kat. Honestly, thank you so much again for this lovely voicemail. It has helped make a few things come to light about this episode that I just want to bring up, because you did mention that, Dean suffered physical abuse at the hands of John, and that Sam suffered basically total neglect and disregard. And that's kind of what we're seeing in this episode, right? We're seeing Dean being, beat by Cass, somebody who he loves. And we're also seeing Sam reflecting on him abandoning the woman that he loves. And I just think that that's truly tragic in more ways than one. He said if we don't end on a down note, then what is a Supernatural fan-run podcast? So there you go. I'm going to put that out there. But I will also finish by saying this, and to kind of address something that you said, Drew, because we do talk more about Dean being queer, because his queer characterization lives a lot more in the text than in the subtext. Of course, we can argue that it's not explicit. We can argue a lot of things, but I think we can all argue that it is very present and very visible for anybody who is or who knows a little bit about the queer community. Sam's queer characterization is much more in the subtext. It is much more in the very subtle coding that he is given, right? For example, this pride thing, right? The fact that to him, it's a reaction of being treated poorly. I'm also thinking about his whole being a freak arc. I'm also thinking about the demon blood. I'm also thinking all of that is very, very much in the subtext, whereas Dean's is much less in the subtext and much more in the open, no matter how much people want to sweep it. Some people want to sweep it under the rug and pretend like it's not there. I absolutely love that. And I fully agree with you, Kat. I do think that this is part of Sam's queer coding, and that his display of pride is much closer to that of the queer community. And interestingly, that's what we're seeing in this episode too, right? In this arc, we're seeing him, taking on something that he knows is going to be extremely challenging, but he wants to do it to prove himself, because He feels like people don't believe in him.
Oh, Sam.
Drew, how about you walk us through your reflection and call to action?
I'm reflecting today on the position I am in, that unlike someone like Cass in this episode, I have my own faculties. I am in control of me. I have autonomy entirely. And I am free to use that how I see fit. And my call to action is to use the fact that I have autonomy and with you on this podcast, a platform, to just use it for good in any way that I can. And you, Mary, your reflection and call to action this week?
Well, so I'm currently going through like several family crises simultaneously, where a lot of things are like coming out and coming to light. And these things really aren't mine to discuss in this particular forum, but like they are taking a toll pretty much on everybody involved. And so my call to action is to remember that the deeper something is buried, the longer it takes to come out, and that it's a process. It can be quite a painful process, but it is better for these things to be out in the open so that we can deal with them. This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Drew Schulman and Marie Vigourou. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber, and for our merch store and our socials. And write us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.